Russia Today.
Welcome to another edition of Russia Today, the show where we attempt to go behind the headlines to see just what makes the new Russia tick, what Russia is doing now, and how Russia is relating to the world. My name is Paul Goebel, and I'll be your host this evening, today, as we explore just what is going on in the Russian art world. Recently, there's been a great deal of attention to Russian art and its relation to Russian-American politics. To discuss the Russian art exhibit that's been held hostage and now negotiations are proceeding between the Russian government and American officials are two distinguished American specialists on Russian art. First, we have Marilyn Pfeiffer-Sweezy, who is a longtime expert on Russian art, who has organized exhibits of Russian art in the past, is the author of a number of critically acclaimed studies on Russian art, who will be discussing just what is in this exhibit and why it's so important. And also, Maida Mazda-McGee, who's a docent at the Hillwood Museum in Washington, D.C., one of the most important collections of Russian art currently in the United States. Thank you both for joining me. Marilyn, if you could tell a little bit about this exhibit, the one that has sparked the controversy leading to all the pictures in the paper.
Well, of course, Paul, the jewels are probably the main drawing card. Jewels from the Diamond Fund in Moscow have never come to the United States before. This is really a first. And many visitors going to Moscow in recent years are not always able to go and visit the jewels of the Diamond Fund. It's a separate exhibition.
Right.
Although it's housed in the Kremlin, it is not part of the Kremlin. So many people have just not been able to visit it when they're there. And there is a real mystique, I think, about the word the Diamond Fund. And
the Romanov family.
Right. And the Romanov family.
Yes.
And of course, the gowns worn at the Imperial Court, the imperial portraits, all of these things have not been seen in the United States before. And then, as a surprise, as a real surprise arrival, were the magnificent ecclesiastical treasures from Yaroslavl, which those icons are just extraordinary.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yes.
And they have literally dazzled thousands and thousands of people. I think at least 80,000 people have visited the Corcoran. So there's a lot to see, and people are just enchanted by it.
And that's one of the reasons that the controversy has drawn so much attention, because
Exactly.
this is such an important exhibit, probably the most important exhibit of Russian art in the United States in many, many years, if not ever.
Well, certainly one of the most special in terms of the pieces that have come so closely associated with the Romanovs, with the Imperial Court, and which pieces which until recently could never even have been thought to be brought out of Russia for exhibition in the West.
Before we focus explicitly on the current controversy, I think it'd be useful to talk a little bit about the history of Russian-American art exchanges. There have been such exchanges in the past. And Maida, could you talk to us about the history of those exhibits?
There has been some exchanges, and the one that we were just talking with Marilyn, the first one, I believe, was in 1979, which came to Metropolitan Museum, and from then on the door opened, and really after so-called perestroika and glasnost, many of these exchanges have been taking place. And there was an exhibit of the Catherine the Great in Memphis, and there were some in Seattle, I believe, in subsequent years, and also earlier in '89. It was 89.
It was 89.
That the Fabergé eggs were sent to San Diego, if you may remember.
Yes.
And that was very well done. It was very well received in that museum, and it really opened the eyes of the people that what existed as treasures in Russia.
In any of these earlier exhibitions, have there been problems between the Russian and American sides in the organization and conduct of these exhibits?
To my knowledge, because it was between museums. And the museums honored their contracts, and they honored what they had sent. Both parties agreed right from the beginning what they were going to do and how they were going to display. So it was quite different than what is happening now. That's what.
Marilyn, could you give us a little background on the current controversy?
Well, it is, of course, a dispute concerning the contract and the money involved in the contract. And as Maida said, it's not between museums. Perhaps the most major difference here between this exhibition and all others from this organizational point of view is that it is not between museums. It was a Russian organizing committee working in cooperation with the American Russian Cultural Foundation, which has arranged for the exhibition. And the museums have just fallen into place. It's also important, I think, to explain here that the Jewels of the Diamond Fund are not essentially part of a museum. Although they're housed in the Kremlin Museum, they don't belong to the Kremlin.
But has it never been true before that there were multiple museums on the Russian side that someone coordinated to bring an exhibit to this country? Is this the first time where an exhibit has come here that comes out of many, many museums or many, many places? I mean, the Diamond Fund not being in a museum?
No, it isn't actually, Paul. There was a wonderful exhibition in 1989 and 90 called Treasures and Traditions, which came to Washington and to Seattle.
I remember seeing that.
Yes, and there were pieces there from a number of museums in Moscow, mainly the Kremlin, but other museums as well. And again, though, it was organized by museum people with museum people here.
Why do you
So
think
that's a
there
major
was?
difference.
Why do you think there was a shift? Why did the American organizers or the Russian organizers choose this particular way, which seems to have led to the conflict?
Well, they are now able to do this. There's freedom.
Able to do it.
They're able to
See,
do
in
it,
the new
and they
atmosphere.
trusted the whole thing.
Exactly.
They trusted the contract.
But there have been American-Russian art exchanges since 1991.
Yeah, but on the museum level, if
Always
I'm
on the
not
Always on the
museum level.
museum level.
Always on the
Yes.
museum level.
And so, but this time there was an entrepreneur in Russia
Exactly.
that was
Exactly.
interested in putting
Before
something
that.
together.
This is
And
the first
was-
time it's been possible to do
Exactly.
this.
Well, it's the first time it's been done. I mean, clearly an
That's true.
entrepreneur
But only
could have been
recently could
operated
it be
in the last
possible.
2 or 3 years. I mean, so this
Yes,
is,
right.
this is the first big one.
And
so
also,
the test
as
case-
Marilyn explained, that we have to make it very clear to the people that the Diamond Fund is completely different than what comes out of the Kremlin, because people kind of put it together. It's controlled completely differently. So what happened there, we do not know.
Well, how is the Diamond Fund controlled?
Well, the Diamond Fund is under the jurisdiction, to put it that way,
Yes,
of
right.
the Ministry of Finance.
Not under the Ministry of Culture.
No.
No, no.
Okay.
No,
Finance.
not at
Finance. All right.
But you see, that's understandable when you realize that the crown jewels of Russia are in the Diamond Fund, are the core of the Diamond Fund.
Right.
And of course, they would belong to the Ministry of Finance, which is, after all, part of the guarantee of the Treasury.
Well,
And these other state
I suspect there are
jewels
some
and-
people who would say it belongs to the Culture Ministry, even if it's worth a great deal of money.
Well, it
Yeah,
doesn't
but still
legally, though.
It doesn't
Legally,
legally.
it doesn't.
No.
But that
It does
means
not.
then that the Diamond Fund could not have, that negotiations could not have been the same. That you would have had to have some
right.
kind of different
Exactly.
organization.
Well, immediately, government people had to be involved.
That's right. So
It's a political, you see, the
That's right.
Diamond Fund is under a political arm of the
Right.
government,
Rather than
not cultural.
And so
culture.
already you've introduced a political element in this, and that
Exactly.
may be part of the reason we've seen some of the difficulties.
Yes.
Now, over the last weeks, we have seen pictures again and again
Many.
of the Russian embassy cars blocking the semi-tractor trailer truck that was to carry art from Washington to Houston, the next exhibition point. And those pictures have appeared on American television night after night. They've appeared in American newspapers. They've drawn comment from journalists, from professors, from art curators. And I would be very curious, Maida, if you could share your thoughts on just how average Americans are reacting to this. You talk to them as Americans
Yes.
come to visit the Hillwood.
That's correct. The average American really cannot understand how a thing like this could be done. Number one, I personally think that it was very undiplomatic on the part of the diplomats to come and block those trucks. And they cannot understand what happened to the contract. Why don't they recognize the sanctity of this contract? If there was a contract, why can't they proceed from one museum to another, as usual, as it has been done before. So, and secondly, people are very disappointed. Well, the ones who saw here, that's fine. But I've had telephone calls from San Diego Museum, where I have friends, and I was there recently talking about some aspects of Russian art. They cannot believe that they are not going to see it because they had prepared in many ways to receive. They had very good relationship before. They received all those Fabergé eggs and everything went smoothly. They cannot understand why this cannot happen smoothly too. And it really creates a very bad feeling. And it spells out, I've heard comments like, do you think a Russian person who wants to open a place in Russia can trust this?
Right. And this is an enormous undertaking to stage an exhibit like this.
Yes.
We're talking about the need to have physical protection for all these treasures.
Yes.
We're talking about scheduling. We're talking about involving hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
And a great deal of money.
Ready.
A great deal of money.
How much money would you say was involved on the American side in terms of getting the arrangements at the museum?
To begin.
I think that the ballpark figure, the cost for each of the museum venues is around $250,000.
That's right.
And that's a lot of money for a museum. That's a lot of money.
Of course, for a museum.
Some of that will be recouped by entrance fees, I suppose.
Yes.
But, because there's enormous interest in this.
But it's a tremendous investment.
And to have it put at risk is going to leave a bad taste.
I think some of the tickets were even accounted for, sold ahead of time, or at least,
you could certainly buy them ahead of time here in Washington.
Well, I believe that was beginning to happen with other museums, the way I understood. So
and
that makes it very difficult for the museum. What are they going to do now? Do they return it? Do they stand by? Do they get rid of the security people that they had put together? What happens?
And they're going to be out some of that money anyway.
Definitely.
Yes,
and some of those museums will probably try to go to court to recover their losses against their perception that the Russians have violated the contract.
That's correct.
Why do you think the Russian government got involved? This was an organizing committee, not the Russian government. This was not a museum-to-museum enterprise, as you've said it was true in the past, but it was not a government-to-government enterprise either. And yet here the Russian government has actively intervened, taken a very public diplomatic step, putting its cars to block a truck on a Washington street. Why do you think that happened?
I really don't know the answer from the top, but the fact that there are diamonds involved, the way I look at it, and the diamond vault there is not part of the museum, perhaps a different kind of negotiation was done by a middleman. And now they see that it's a very lucrative show, and maybe they think that they can get more money out of it. I really don't know.
No, but one thing is the organizing committee doing something to try to get more money. The other question is, why would the Russian government do it? One can't really imagine if there were an agreement between American museums and American organizing committee and, let us say, a French set of museums for an exhibit of French art here. The French government being willing to put its diplomatic cars around a truck to prevent the movement of treasures from the Louvre moving from here to Chicago, say.
I don't believe that would happen.
No, unthinkable.
And that's what I've heard many Americans ask. Why would they do this? Why? I could understand the organizing committee thinking maybe we didn't get enough money.
That's right.
What I don't understand is the Russian government making a decision to get involved here. And I haven't heard anyone come up with a good answer.
But the question is, who in the Russian government made this decision? Exactly. We don't know.
Well, it had to be fairly high up for someone to give an order to the Russian ambassador in Washington.
To stop it.
That's right.
But we don't know who did it.
Well, the organizing committee obviously appealed to somebody with authority who has given that order.
And
of course, from the very beginning, the Russian embassy was involved in this exhibition. The preview of the exhibition took place not at the Corcoran, but at the Russian embassy, at a ball, a grand ball last November.
I remember that. I received an invitation to it.
Yes,
didn't go, but did receive an invitation.
And the jewels were first exhibited there, just a few of them, that very night.
Just a very few.
A very few.
Thank you. We'll now take a brief break for our information page, and then we'll return to continue our discussion of the troubles right now in the exchange of Russian art in the United States.
American Council of Teachers of Russian for Russian textbooks, video courses, and language and cultural programs. Call 202-833-7522. Olympus Russian School provides studies in Russian language, history of Russia, storytelling, drama, and conversational language. All instruction is in Russian.
Cultural insights for enhanced business or personal travel. Information on Russian artists and art exhibits.
Welcome back to our discussion on Russia Today of the controversies surrounding the exhibit of Russian art in the United States, the treasures from the Diamond Fund in Moscow, and other treasures from around the Russian Federation. We have been talking about that with Marilyn Sweezy and Maida McGee, and we'll continue our discussion now looking at what this all means for the future. The reaction of Americans to the intervention of the Russian government to block the further movement of this exhibit until negotiations could proceed is obviously going to have an impact on art exchanges between Russia and the United States, and I'd be interested in each of your comments on that, but I'd also like to know how you see this affecting a broader set of relations, because this really calls into question how much can you trust someone who represents himself as being willing to live up to a contract when he comes to you from Moscow.
Well, that's right, Paul. And I think the ill effects of this far outweigh anything that anyone involved in these negotiations thinks he can gain. First of all, people are already misunderstanding the whole situation and immediately blame Russia as such, Russia in general.
Right.
And Russia is acquiring a slightly negative image
That's right.
in the United States, which is most unfortunate and most undeserved. And secondly, it's already affecting the future of art exhibitions. I am involved in the preparation of several additional art
so
exhibitions.
Into the future.
And we hope that it will not have an impact, but I have heard comments from people who are involved in one way or another saying, well, I wonder if we really ought to send these things to Russia today.
Maida, have you heard that sort of comment too?
Yes, I have heard several comments like that. First of all, it has been in the minds of people, why would they break a contract? A contract is very sacred for the Americans. It's a binding. And once they sign, no matter how good or how bad, they'll stand by it. So they're completely surprised that such a thing happened. And again, I agree with Marilyn that the word is Russia. And the Russians, it's really a shame. It is kind of sad to see that it's not deserving, because I don't believe that Russian people have anything to do with it.
Absolutely.
Not. But then on the other hand also, I am wondering the way it is reading in Russia, that they don't get the impression that we want to keep these treasures. That, I hope, can be avoided.
Have either of you looked at how this controversy is being covered in the Russian press? I've seen a couple of articles on it, and most of the ITAR-TASS and Interfax reporting has been fairly straightforward, without accusations that the Americans are trying to steal it. On the other hand, I suspect there are articles in some newspapers that are suggesting exactly the kinds of things.
It all depends who reads it, too.
And how they read it. But I think you made a terribly important point, Maida, and that is, one of the things that's really tragic about this controversy is that people are going from a problem with a small set of individuals who organized this and blaming the entire Russian people and just Russia. Why is Russia doing this? People don't say, why did the organizing committee do it? They're saying, why did Russia do this?
Yeah, an average person. Yeah, an average person talks about Russia, the Russians. Who sent it? Russians. You know, they don't realize that there was an organization and committee, and they don't read through that.
I think that's what makes the intervention of the Russian embassy such a problem, because that reinforces the attitude that this is official policy, that this isn't just a group. I mean, any country is going to have a group of people. I suspect each of you has had experience with less than savory people who sign contracts and then don't deliver on
Oh,
them.
yes.
And I'm sure that happens even in the art world.
Yes.
Yes, you have
But
to
you don't
watch for
necessarily
it.
decide that just because those people don't do it, that all Americans are bad or all Frenchmen are bad. But there are a lot of people, I think, who are making judgments about Russia as a whole here.
Yeah,
Yes,
it is.
unfortunately.
Now, are there any major exhibits that either of you know about that are being talked about in the next
That's
5
coming.
years that may now actually not happen? That there are things we may not get to see in the United States because of what's going on right now?
Well, Marilyn, you were preparing something.
Yes, we hope not, Paul. I'm involved in a wonderful exhibition that we hope will come at the end of this year, Treasures from the Kremlin, 850 years of Moscow.
Right.
And it's 310 pieces from the 12th to the 20th century. Many of them have come out of storage. They've never been seen before, and I've seen them all in Moscow, and
lucky
they are
you.
wonderful.
But isn't
We
that
hope that will not be impacted.
isn't that though really at risk? Because one of the things that at least some of the organizing committee representatives said for the Russian side, that the reason they needed to intervene was to get this collection back to Moscow in time for the celebration of the 850th anniversary of the founding of the city of Moscow.
Well, in view of this exhibition that is coming here
Right.
in honor of the celebration, I really wonder if that's absolutely accurate.
Well, I don't think it maybe is, but I'm just saying that if that's a claim that's being made,
Yes.
it does suggest that perhaps this other exhibit might be at risk, and then we're all the losers.
Well, that claim can't be accurate. If they had
No,
signed
it
a
can't.
contract and they knew that there were these museums, 3 more museums involved in it, I mean, after all, they're very intelligent people.
Well, I'm
But
not suggesting it's accurate. I'm just mentioning that
Well,
that was
and
put
Paul,
on
the
the record.
celebrations for the 850th anniversary of Moscow have been planned for the last
years.
5 years or more.
Oh no, I'm not.
There's
Please
no
don't take it.
way.
I'm defending what these people said. I'm just saying that once people make a claim,
That's correct.
even if it's not entirely accurate,
Yeah.
it takes on a life of its own.
Of course.
I would think it might have an impact on this
For
particular
this-
exhibit that you're talking about. Now, how do you see this affecting the relationship more broadly? I think a lot of Americans are
Yes.
saying, well, if they won't respect contracts, why should we invest in Russia? If they won't respect
Yes.
contracts, why should we accept their word on arms control treaties? And that this has the effect of driving us back to a bad old time
That's
when
true.
no one in the United States was prepared to trust anyone coming out of Moscow.
Well, it is a bit of a step backward in
Yeah,
that
it is.
respect.
And I have
There's no
heard
doubt about
exactly
that.
what you're trying to say, that how can anybody go there and have some business and really find out this contract that he or she had made right here or back there, that it's not going to really be validated.
Well, we
after a while.
certainly can think of the really terrible things that can come here. How do you
Yes.
see this being overcome? How do you think this may be worked out?
Yes.
And what do you each see as being the likely next steps? Are we going to go back to a museum-to-museum arrangement, which worked so well in the past? Are the Americans going to come up with more money? Is the exhibit going to go forward? I'd be curious to have each of you comment on that.
Well, I hope that the exhibition will move on to Houston. That will help a lot. If it goes even to one more venue, that will help a lot. If it doesn't, there's a lot to be lost by everyone, I think.
Now, do you think the American museums will be willing to come up with a little more money each,
Well,
which seems to be what the organizing committee...
It is possible because after all they have already spent quite a bit of money to get prepared for this. And I really hope that they have a goodwill to send it to all the 3 museums, because that might change the opinion of the Americans and somehow find out that this was just a misunderstanding between 2 parties or an individual or contract. Because if they don't, there will really be a lot of step back.
Well, regardless of how it does work out, and I certainly hope it goes on to Houston and indeed all the cities, do you think there's going to be a drive back here to let's go back to the museum-to-museum arrangement? In other words, or government-to-government rather than allowing any intermediate bodies on either side to intervene?
I think it will, Paul.
It
I think
will.
that this exhibition was right away a one-time thing. It's already out of the ordinary. Exhibitions are not usually done on this basis, and I think after this they probably will not be attempted again.
Not be tried again.
No.
So
The Ministry of Culture, I think, will step in and
we'll go back to the museum.
Absolutely,
To the museum.
yes.
Now that'll have some costs, as
Sure.
perhaps we'll never see something from the Diamond Fund again, if that were the case.
that's possible because the Diamond Fund is not
Separate.
It's under a
Completely.
different jurisdiction.
I mean, but it will be either government to government or museum to museum.
museum.
Then in
Yes.
effect,
Or both. The Ministry of Culture
Culture
working
would
with
be
the museums.
involved.
I think
I
that's
think so,
going to
too.
become
I
more and
think
more
so.
of a
so
pattern.
that what we're in effect seeing is to go back to a more state-to-state organization of these things and less room for private entrepreneurs.
Yes,
Yes.
So that the
definitely.
Russian entrepreneurs who set this up may get a little more money this time, but they have managed to put a fix in so that they
Exactly.
won't be able to make money like this ever again, especially if this falls through.
There won't be any
Absolutely.
trust anymore, you know,
And
if it falls
reestablishing
through.
trust is fundamental. I'd like to thank both of you for joining me today on Russia Today to discuss the problems about the Russian art in the future and in the past. And I think we all hope that something will be worked out so that the exhibit
Hope
will
so.
go forward and that more exhibits will be going in both directions, from the United States to Russia and from Russia to our country. I'd like to thank Marilyn Pfeiffer Sweezy and Maida Mazda McGee for joining me on Russia Today, and I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in to this discussion once again of the story behind the headlines here on Russia Today.